Welcome to Fun with Annuities, where every single week I welcome a celebrity guest expert that can help you maximize Chapter 2 of your life. Listen, learn, laugh, and love every minute of the most unique financial podcast on the planet. Let's get to it. Welcome to Fun with Annuities. I'm your host, Stan the Annuity Man, America's Annuity Agent. And I'm so happy that you joined us today. Welcome to everyone on all the major podcast platforms and also on the Fun with Annuities YouTube channel. As everyone probably already knows, I have one of the biggest annuity channels on YouTube called Stan the Annuity Man. But the Fun with Annuities YouTube channel is fun as well because you get to see me and the guests interacting. But welcome. Let me introduce our guest so we can get right to it because I want to pick his brain clean before he gets off of this podcast. His name is JAIME Hopkins. We're going to have his website and how to get in touch with him, how to buy his books and all that stuff on my site. He'll have a permanent page on my site, just like all of our celebrity guests. He's the managing partner of Wealth Solutions. He's a finance professor of practice at Creighton University's Hyder College of Business. He's also a nationally recognized writer and researcher. You might have read his stuff in Forbes, Investment News, and Market Watch, just to name a few. He's co-authored 3 textbooks and has 2 ebooks on retirement planning. He's also the author of a book he wrote in 2018, which I love, the title, Rewirement, not retirement, but Rewirement, rewiring the way you think about retirement. It's a fantastic book. Once again, we'll have that on our site. You can link and buy that as well. He received his Bachelor of Arts degree in political science at Davidson College in North Carolina, where he was captain of the Division I varsity men's swim team, which tells, if you know anything about that discipline, that kind of tells you who he is. He attended the Villanova School of Law, where he earned his JD and graduated there with honors. He also went to Temple University there in Philadelphia as well for his LLM and for financial planning designations. My new nickname for JAIME is The Future. I'm going to call him JAIME The Future Hopkins because he is the new face and voice of retirement income planning, in my opinion. And the reason I can do that, if they can call LeBron James the King, then JAIME Hopkins can no doubt be called the Future. Welcome to Fun with Annuities, JAIME Hopkins.
I love that, man. The future. I like it. It's I don't know if I feel that way personally, but that is a strong introduction.
Let me just tell all of the people that are listening out there and the ones that are viewing this, you just probably fainted because JAIME's young. That's the reason I call him the future. He's been voted, top dude under 40, top dude under 30. Every time he'll be top dude under 50. He's that guy. But let's talk a little bit about basketball first, JAIME, because if you don't know this, I put myself through college playing basketball, played at the University of Central Florida. But Davidson College, I grew up in the Charlotte area. My parents actually lived in the Davidson area. And for anyone that cares about basketball, that's where Steph Curry played. Mm-hmm. So, we got some Davidson stuff there. And I was looking through your podcast where you actually interviewed Bob McKillop, which I thought was cool, who was actually a thought leader and could, if he ran a business, it'd be a good one. But also, food for thought. My dad used to coach at Appalachian State a long time ago.
Yeah. So I don't know if they're in all the same leagues anymore. I think they were. When I was at school there, we played them in almost everything. Yeah. And I think Davidson has since switched leagues for some things, not everything, but some things they've moved out. Basketball, right? They shifted leagues. But Bob McKillop, I mean, he was there when I was there. He's been there a long time at Davidson. His kids have gone through the program. Sure. They were there when I was there. Sure. And I had the pleasure of having him on our show Framework. And he's just, as you said, if he was a business owner, he would run a very good business. He's a great leader of people, and that's one of the things I remembered from being there and just being around him. And it's a tiny school, right? If you're from the Charlotte area or even know anything about it, when I was there, it was only like 1,450 college students. I think it's up to 1,800 to 2,000 now. So it's grown a lot, and it's still a tiny school. But Curry was a freshman when I was a senior. I did get to meet him. I played some pickups games with him. I mean, reality is I was in the training room injured a lot, when they're all getting taped up. But it was funny. Like, we didn't know him as Steph Curry then. You knew him as Del Curry's kid. And that's a really funny thing to look back upon now. Hey, Del Curry was a great player. We didn't know who he was, but not because he was supposed to be famous, because his dad was famous.
I know.
But
I know.
the story changed after that.
Well, let's segue from that into finances. I know that's going to be interesting, but watch this pivot. How did your sports background, your discipline as a swimmer, play into the success of you achieving what you have so far in the world of finance and retirement income planning? Is there a correlation there?
There is, and I you don't know it when you're going through sports exactly, that the lessons you're learning are going to pay dividends later on in life. We already talked about one great coach. Now, obviously, I didn't play for Coach McKillop, but I did get to spend time with him. I also swam, you brought up, in Baltimore growing up, and I swam on a team, North Baltimore Aquatic Club, NBAC. Talking about another great athlete, Michael Phelps and I grew up together. We're a month apart in age. We were on the same team and same practices, same lane for almost 15 years. So Coach Bob Bowman, who's been, I think, 4 or 5 time Olympic head coach, was my coach growing up. And I still talk to him. I text with him fairly frequently. And, he taught me a lot just about being a better person and being disciplined and being willing to put in the work when it's not fun, doing the extra things, going from good to great. Working on Sundays when your competitors are sitting at home, right? Yep. Training differently than other people are training. So, we moved away from a lot of static stretching back in the day before that was popular. And I always tell people this story, like, think back about the NFL in the 90s, and they had those big circles and they'd all been pulling on their legs. And what we found out is that type of stretching increased injury. We moved away from that back in the 90s. So if people can visually remember Michael stretching completely different, right? Flapping his arms, swinging them around. And that all came from that. And Michael never really got kind of seriously injured throughout his entire career. And that helped him achieve a level of greatness that others weren't able to achieve. And a lot of those things came into me during my life, that looking at the little things, putting in that extra bit of work, because a lot of people are pretty good at stuff. Not a lot of people are great at things. And that's where that difference is, right? You can be pretty good. And I often ask people in a room, right? Oh, how do you feel about this? Are you pretty good? Yeah, people kind of nod. Are you great at it? And a lot of people stop short of that, right? That greatness is a different level of commitment, and a lot of it's mental, right? It's not just physical. I've talked about this many times before. I don't know if everyone agrees with me anymore, but physically, I used to tell people Michael wasn't the most talented swimmer I ever swam with. He's clearly the greatest, and it's not even close. But he wasn't the physically most talented that I personally believe I ever swam with. I could be wrong about that. But, he did all those extra little things that other people weren't doing. So it was a mix of talent and having the right coach, the right opportunity, and the drive and being willing to do it when other people weren't. And swimming's a tough sport. Mentally, it's not easy because you're alone. You're looking at a black line and going back and forth.
Well, those extra little things, stretching differently and those type of things. What are some examples that when you look at retirement income and you started getting into this and digging in and writing the books and doing what you do, what were the things that you started to see that were missing that you needed to adopt and you were going to tell people from a client standpoint that they needed to adopt?
Yeah, and we can start with some little things and move up from there. I mean, there's amazingly small things that have a big impact, which is just, did you think about, your Medicare? And I'm going through that with somebody right now, and just, making a better decision around Medicare, not just enrolling and trying to avoid premiums, but actually sitting down and running it and looking at what prescription drugs you have. And are those covered? And those are small things, but they can add up a lot. And in every area of retirement that exists too, right? Are you living in the right house? Or are you just living there because you've always lived there and it's way too big, it's got 6 bedrooms and it's tough to keep up and you're not even really happy there anymore? So thinking about your home equity and what are ways to leverage that or even spend it down at some point in your life, or is that your legacy asset? And those are, you would think that those are pretty basic conversations you should have. People weren't having them. The other one, long-term care, this is a really basic one. A lot of people are like, oh, well, my family will help or my kids will be my executor. And I'm always like, have you even asked them? Like, did you take the time to just ask your kids, do they want to be your executor? Do they want to help with your care? And the answer is probably yes. You're probably right if you're writing it down to assume it, but you ask the question and put them on notice and have that conversation. And those are little things, and all those things add up. And then what you see is, if people aren't living the retirement and not having the confidence that they otherwise would want. And end of day, I've shifted my mental thinking about retirement a lot on this. I used to be more of a, think about things in the X's and O's and the numbers,
Mm-hmm.
and, is it optimal? And you'll hear that on the, on the researcher side. And I've been a professor now for 15 years. And a lot of my fellow researchers have talked about optimal retirement spend down strategies. And what I learned is most people don't care about optimal.
Right.
If you had a less optimal retirement, but they were happier, did you do your job? And I think the answer is probably yes. Like, if you told me I'd have no more money, but I'd be the happiest person alive for the rest of my life, I would make that trade any second of the day, right? I mean, it's an easy one. So I think a lot of it gets back to how do we increase people's satisfaction, the return on sleep, ROS, which I like that terminology.
Return on sleep.
Yep.
Forget ROI, it's ROS. Interesting.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
Yeah. Well, as I said, if you ask somebody, right, would you give up all the money and all the stuff you have if you were happy for the rest of your life? And I think most people's answer is yes, right? So that's really what we're aiming for, right? Dollars aren't really all that important in and of themselves. Is what do they allow us to accomplish and do, right? They're a means to an end. I mean, that's why, dollars and monetary things were created, not in and of themselves, but to accomplish other goals.
That answer is an easy answer for people. Yes, I'd love to be happy, but it's also a scary answer. It's also falling off a cliff a little bit for people because it takes them out of their comfort zone. How do you transition or help people transition from them nodding their head when you say, would you give it all up to live a better life, to finding that happy medium where they can meet you in the middle and go live that life?
This is a challenge for people heading into retirement. I'm going to be very simple about this. And it's because of how we're, conditioned. It's how we're trained. It's how we're educated. So I talk about this, which in the book, but I actually kind of learned some of this after I wrote the first edition of the book, which was just think about what we do during our working years. And you just have to stop sometime and put it down. And all we're taught is save. We're taught to put money aside. We're taught the budget, which is really usually a form of making sure that we're saving enough, right? That we're not overspending. We're not taught to spend down assets until we get to retirement. And then I'd argue, right, we're not really taught it. We're not even conditioned. We're just told, hey, now's the time to spend down. So we spend our entire lives working 30 years, really just hoping the account goes up, right? We log into our bank to make sure it went up. And that's really all we care about, right? There's been some studies from places internally. I think Wells Fargo said like 80 some percent of people only log in to their account to make sure the money is there. It's the only reason they log in. So you look at something like that, like that's what we're doing. We just want to see it go up. Even return on investment. I know people might care at the end of the year, but throughout the year, we just want to make sure the money's not gone. And so we're taught our whole lives to look at this thing going up and to save and put money aside. And then one day we retire. Very few people phase into retirement. And now somehow we're just supposed to magically do something completely different than I did for the last 30 years. Honestly, it doesn't make any sense to believe that people are going to be good at that, right? If I tell you to do something for 30 years, you do it for 30 years, then the next day I say, well, now you need to do the opposite of that. You just told me to only learn one thing for 30 years.
Yeah, we teach accumulation, but at the end of the day, it's decumulation. Do you think we need a new word for that? I mean, the industry sometimes, the retirement industry, annuity industry, they start speaking in their own language, not in the consumer's language, which I try to speak in English out here with people. Decumulation means nothing to people. In fact, it sounds bad.
Yeah, most of the thing, right? Actually, even spend down, decumulation, they all have negative connotations. And I'm actually terrible at that. As I said, I'm an academic at heart and I fall into using, and an attorney, right? So like we're the worst offenders of using our own lingo that means nothing to anyone else to make ourselves sound smarter. I don't even know if the term retirement is a great term either. If you look at that from an accounting definition, right, it means essentially that the useful life of the, object has passed. So, when you send something into retirement, it means it has no value anymore. And so I don't even know if that's a great term, but that's just so, the people who try to change that term in the sense of get rid of it, I think it's tough because it's very ingrained, not just in the United States, but the equivalent of that word is used throughout the world. So it's very hard to change that overnight. Now, the income planning versus decumulation, spend down, that's a little bit newer. So I do think that we could end up with a word that's, or a phrase that is better in that space. I haven't tried to define that one. I mean, I did change mine, right? Rewirement, which I own the trademark for too.
Good.
Which was,
because I was getting ready to call my lawyer and say, hey, let's get that.
it's a good one, right? And,
I like it.
And the whole point of that was that, we do need to change the way we think about from accumulation to decumulation, or however you want to, think about it, from right? Saving to spending is really what I think about, right? How do we go from a saving mindset to a spending mindset? Because that's really what it's about, right? We're saving to achieve some goal and then we're spending to achieve some goal. And, we're not all going to spend the same. We don't all have the same goals, but I'm very much a goal-based oriented planner, if you might use that term. I like to set goals and aim towards them. And there's a lot of behavioral research that supports the notion of goal setting and working towards something in sight. Actually working back from it is usually better. So, but it's not easy. And that change is fundamentally opposed to how people are wired for their entire working career. I think that as a industry, as a profession, as a society, we need to get a lot better at a couple things. One of them is a really short, simple one, which we're getting close to, which is just showing people how much income they'll have in retirement while they're saving. That's been discussed forever. And it just seems like such a beneficial thing that we've dragged our feet on for decades now as a country. And now it's coming, right? Where we're going to see that statement inside the 401k or otherwise, but
sure,
it probably took way too long. Formal phased retirements is a really big one. And I think that if we can get there, that'll be a big behavioral one that'll be beneficial, is this expectation that people are just supposed to retire one day, they still work a full day, and the next day they're in retirement. There's a lot of negatives with that. Now, retirees are on the whole happier. However, you have more depressed people in retirement than you do of the whole population too. So even though you get more people that move upscale to a happy level, so it pulls the average up, the number of people who actually lose meaning because their work goes away, they become more isolated, also increases. And so that's a group that I think gets lost, because you see a lot of the stats say, oh, retired grandparents are the happiest people in the world. True, but then there's this other group that gets isolated that we kind of forget about because averages tell a terrible story. And I think that's a big group that honestly we need to do better on, helping them find meaning, sustainable income, all of those things. And they're getting lost. And I don't say that we have a retirement crisis on our hands, but individuals obviously have retirement crises on their hands.
Well, and with there's a demographic tidal wave that's happening with, 10,000 baby boomers reaching age 65, which I'm just getting ready to say, I call that chapter 2. We can call it decumulation or second stage, but it's chapter 2 of your life is what I tell people. And, being from the South and growing up in the South, and you'll giggle from this because when you went to Davidson, you started eating barbecue and you got that twang in your voice, right? I always tell people there's no U-Hauls behind hearses. And if you see one, take a picture. What I'm trying to tell people is live for the day. And COVID has taught us one thing, that life is fragile. How are you, when people come to you and they're worried about retirement, how are you encouraging people to try to live for the day, even though they've been box checkers and planners and savers and scrimpers their whole life? That's who's listening to this podcast. That person that has, in their world, made it to the finish line and they've done a heck of a job doing it. And now it kind of needs to be about them. How do you make it about them?
You have to start, in my view, with planning, and you have to give people confidence that where they're going, they can get there. There's a lot of different ways to do that. It's not one way, but to show people that there's a path to where they want to go. And community does that for people in certain areas, right? It's why people join things like churches, why people join things like AA, because they want to see that somebody else has done it before. And, working with professionals can do that because they have worked with hundreds or thousands, or a firm might have helped thousands of people achieve a better retirement. And so then all of a sudden, it's possible. And then they start showing you the steps that you can take to be proactive about getting there. Sometimes, some individuals just need to see numbers run and presented back to them and say, look, you actually can spend this, and here's what the data, numbers, and analytics show on what you can actually spend, and that you're not going to run out of money. And you see people who, save, live their whole retirement, don't spend anything, and die with millions of dollars left over. We had one of our advisors recently telling us a story about how he actually gave one of his clients a new jacket because the client was literally worth millions of dollars and had worn the same jacket for 20 some years. years.
Right.
Now, and here's the sad part. When he passed away, they said they were cleaning out his home. The jacket was still wrapped up. He never unwrapped the jacket. It was still in the plastic, right?
Yeah.
Wouldn't even use something that was given to him because he was that concerned about running out of money.
Mm-hmm.
And, those things are always kind of sad because you're probably not living your best life. You're probably not enjoying things to the level that you could. And I think another big piece is, health is wealth. So, mental health, physical wealth. I think when you brought up the COVID in this last year and a half is, those are important things that you saw people that are not here anymore that because their health wasn't good or they passed away. And no matter how much wealth you accumulated, as you said, you don't get to take that with you. Maybe ancient Egyptians believe that, but I don't think most people do anymore. We don't get buried with our belongings very often. So I think part of it is figuring out just what do you want to accomplish. And I always tell people, how do you want to make those feel that you care about when you pass away, right? How do you want to make them feel? Not what do you want to give them, but how do you want to make them feel? Do you want them to, say, oh, mom and dad, they were just penny pinchers. They never spent $1, right? Is that really how you want to make them feel when you pass away or that you were unplanned for your death? And I think it's a really important question. Estate planning attorneys don't ask it very much, but it's a great question to ask yourself, how do you want to make people feel when you're gone? And Daryl Green, so we talked about sports before. And East Coast. So Daryl Green and I talked one time, and I actually
explain to the people who Daryl Green is.
Yeah, so Daryl Green is arguably, top 3 cornerback ever to play in the National Football League.
Maybe the fastest person ever in the National Football League.
Yep, arguably the fastest. So I think for a good 15 years, he was something like that. He was the fastest man in the NFL. And they used to race. So people forget about that. But in the late 80s and 90s, they used to actually race for that title. And, I think he's maybe second or third all time from the clock going through combine-based stuff. He's still up there in the top 3. But played for Washington. You won a couple Super Bowls, played under Hall of Fame coach Joe Gibbs, who then went on for JGR Racing. And he told me one time, too, he's one of the more humble people I've ever met, right? He's in the Hall of Fame, one of the top people ever to play the game, one of the fastest people ever to be alive. And he's just amazingly humble, like so humble that you're like, I want you to tell me cool stories about you just shutting people down, but he won't. He just talks to, and it's amazing because he said, I don't want to be remembered as a football player. He goes, I want to be remembered as Dale Green, a great man. Oh, and by the way, he played football. And I thought that was such an amazing thing to think about, right? And he brought that up because of Jack Kent Cooke being a football owner. And he goes, I don't want to be remembered like that. Oh, you had all this, but think about all the stuff he must have done in his lifetime, but he's only remembered for owning a team. Right? Like it is obviously important to him, but wouldn't you rather be remembered as, oh, Daryl Green, a great person, and oh, by the way, right, he was a financial advisor, right? Like I think that's a really cool way to look at things, right? Just how you want to be remembered, and are you going to be remembered for the things that you actually want to be remembered for? Or are you going to be remembered for things that you don't necessarily care as much that people look at you about? And all that, ties into your retirement, right? How are you going to live your life? Are you going to be giving back, or are you going to be remembered as the person who passed away, never spent a single dollar, and never looked happy while they did it?
How does Jamie Hopkins want to change the game? I know we're not talking about legacy, but what's your drive? I mean, what you're getting up in the morning, you're a swimmer, you get up early, right? What's the drive for Jamie Hopkins to change things in the retirement income planning world, which has been static for a long, long time? And you have people like you out there, and then you have really freaky people like me that are these other personalities that are trying to tell the truth about these things. What are you trying to do and change in the industry, or are you?
I absolutely am. I have a number tied to it, but maybe I just need to change it. There's nothing magical about the number, but I set out with just putting it down one time, said I'd like to make retirement secure for more than 1 million Americans. And there's no reason it only has to be Americans or that it only has to be limited to 1 million people, but it felt good at the beginning. The reality is actually, if I could track stuff, maybe I've already had an impact on 1 million people. I don't know. But the drive behind it's a very simple, but also complex story, which just goes back to my family. It's personal. And I, 8 years old, I'll do the quick version of this, but
this is the part that my listeners want to know.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming a lot of your customers would be interested in knowing, and I want to know how you tick. So go deep as you want to go.
Yeah. So, I grew up outside Baltimore. Neither one of my parents graduated from college. My dad did roofing, gutters, fascia, siding, all stuff high up on the ladder. My mom helped run a business with them. So that's what they did. And I was 8 years old. My dad goes up on a ladder. It starts to rain, temperatures drop, and aluminum ladders freeze over faster than a roof does. So he's coming down, he slips, falls, and passes away right there. All of a sudden, then my mom, who,
how old were you, Jamie? How old were
8 years old. So I've got four younger sisters. I'm
Wow.
8. Neither parent graduated college. No life insurance, right? No term policy.
Okay.
Now, this is I don't go out and sell insurance today. I'm not a licensed insurance agent.
Okay.
So this is not a sales pitch for term, but I always tell people that's the,
Right.
My family, I would have been better off. My mom would have been better off. And that's the perfect example, right? You got, essentially one income earner in the sense of, right, is the one out there doing the work. Now, my mom was earning income, and she still is actually running that business today, 37 years later or whatever.
Good for her.
It may be.
Good for her.
But right at that moment, there was no one else to go out and do the work, right? You can't make money doing construction if nobody can go out and do the work. It's the perfect person to have term insurance. You got young kids, high risk job, no college, and they didn't have that planning. That planning didn't get to people in the construction world, right? It doesn't really today either. The industry is not set up to get advice down to people like that definitely need it, and even simple pieces of advice. So you fast forward and I got a lot of great opportunities. My mom kept working. She put us through college. I got opportunities to get scholarships. I was a good enough swimmer to get a scholarship. I wasn't a great swimmer. Went to a great school though, Davidson. Got to, go to law school, took out a bunch of loans like a lot of other people, and just started seeing TV ads and say, come do your retirement planning here with us. And I kept thinking, well, what does somebody like my mom do who's never had a pension, who's never had a 401k, who didn't have an IRA at that time? And what do they do? They're going to be very reliant on Social Security and Medicare and their home. And, that's the reality of where my mom is today. I started seeing that, and then I got the opportunity to clerk in the appellate division. And one of the cases I got to work on was one of Bernie Madoff's cases. And it showed you the opposite of what you would like to see in this profession, right? Which that was the abuse of trust versus the trusted advisor who is actually helping people move forward. And, it just kind of all the pieces were starting to click then that there was this huge, right? You just see the data and you said the 10,000 hitting 65 every day. And you saw the data, you saw these TV ads. Every time you turned on the TV, there was a Fidelity or other ad on there. They did good ads, but I just knew that there was a gap out there. And then I did some estate planning work. I worked on some pension cases. I worked in private equity. And then eventually I got an opportunity to kind of shift specifically into the income planning field. And I spent 7 years at American College with my co-director there, David Littell, building out the RICP. For people who don't know, that Retirement Income Certified Professional. And over 7 years, we impacted right around 18,000 financial advisors and agents had went through that college program. And that's a lot. To put that in perspective, it was more during that stretch than we're going into the CFP. So that's not because I'm magic or David was magic. We were in the right space at the right time, and everyone was saying, come work with us, but nobody was really doing training and education and research on it. And it's done very well. And so it's, if you think about, I don't know what the numbers are now. I've been gone for 3 years, and I for professorship at Creighton, and then I joined Carson because I actually had another insight. My other insight was I had an advisor that went through, and he came to a presentation later on of mine. And I was presenting on Roth conversions and some tax efficient ways to manage a retirement income portfolio. And I think I saw him 2 years again later. I think it was 2 years. And he comes up to me and goes, Jamie, do you have that slide deck from that presentation 2 years ago? And I go, yeah, I could get it to you. He goes, yeah, there was a lot of stuff I wanted to implement from that, but never really got around to it. And I just remember thinking, like, it was depressing, right? There's this person who went through this program. Great, he did that. He showed up to another presentation. He's still interested in it. But somehow 2 years had passed, and he hadn't actually taken any of that and put it into practice. And it was depressing for me because I thought, here I am, I'm educating, I'm helping advisors get better. And then I realized that unless I take another step forward, I'm actually able to create the systems and the processes that help them implement this with the clients, I am educating, but I'm not changing. And obviously education is very important, but I have personally, I'm a big supporter of education, but I have also personally changed my mindset on that at one point I thought you could just educate people and the world would change. and now I know education is a piece of it. It's not the solution. And interestingly enough, there's actually a ton of research, which I didn't know at the time, about how ineffective education alone is in most areas, right? That it does need to be coupled with opportunity, systems, processes, but education is still important. And it's also often a very cost-effective way to do things and implement change, right? Building technology and systems to get people into is very expensive. Educating people tends to be fairly cheap in comparison. So I looked out for a place that I thought was just interesting and was building systems that would help advisors create more secure retirement for their clients. And I found Carson and ended up joining here, and have spent 3 years here now, feeling like we're doing that. And we impact a lot of households is the way we look at things at our firm. We have served 39,000 households now at Carson, which is a lot. Good. So I'm not at the million internally yet, but that's a lot of individuals getting help, and a lot more people still need it, though, right? When you think about that number as the grand scheme of the world, it's not even 1% of 1%, right? It's a very small piece of the overall pie. But that's what makes it easy for me. So if you get back to the end of the day, people are like, well, you work pretty hard, Jamie, and you get up early and you work late, and all these different things that I'm involved with. It's easy because what I tell people is my why makes me cry. It's very easy. I'll never have a moment in my life where I'm like, I don't want to work anymore. I don't want to do that, because it's very easy. You think about your mom and your dad passing away and you're 8 and leaving your family in that situation, and your mom struggling for all those years. I'm never going to get tired of that. I'm never going to not have that as a driving factor. And so when I coach people too, I always say that, right? Find a why that makes you cry. And if you have that, right, you'll be able to outwork other people. And I know a lot of people think they work hard, but typically people who have that why deeply rooted, they understand it, they can go back to it, they pull from it like a well, they can outwork other people. And a lot of it just comes down to that. Are you willing to put in the extra? And that's my driving why. So it's it's personal, and it's, I think, most whys should be.
Great background and great foundation for the listeners and viewers. The why that makes you cry, can that be applied to the retiree or the person going toward retirement, planning for retirement? Can you explain and give some examples possibly of the why that makes you cry for people that are going to chapter 2 of their life?
Absolutely. I mean, you can use that in any area of your life. It just takes work. It takes work on driving down into yourself and understanding what makes you click, what you're afraid of. So a great example of this is I was talking to Dr. Brad Klontz one time, who's a fantastic author and writer. And he was talking about, I think it's his great grandmother, right, was, super conservative with her spending and how she approached things. And even some of that still impacts him today. And, you can look at things like that. Like, maybe you have a family member you don't want to be like, and you don't want to live the life that they did. Or, as I said, you want to change, like you're very involved with your church, and you want to leave a lasting legacy and impact. So how are you going to live your retirement to actually give back and make meaningful change there? And if every day you wake up and say, you know what, I'm doing something positive today with my life, and I'm living my retirement in a way that's going to, show the change that I want to have. Or maybe your parents or grandparents passed away when you were young and you didn't get to spend time with, you never got to spend time with your grandparents, and you want to make sure that your grandchildren have that time with you. I mean, that's a why that would make you cry, right? Being able to have grandchildren that grow up, loving the experiences that they had with you. And that's how you design where you want to live, how you want to spend your time. And so I think all of those, right, they can be different. There's not one answer for anyone there. But I do think if you get to retirement and you say, I have zero passions and I don't have anything I care about, right, like you're not going to live a great retirement, right? Whatever it might be, like find that peace. And it might be, whatever it is for you. I mean, I think that's deeply personal. It's also why all this stuff is called personal finance, because it's about you. It's personal. One of my friends, Paul West, always, when he does presentations on this, he holds up his thumb and he says, what's this? It's my thumbprint. It's unique to me, just like your retirement will be unique to you.
I love that, because the whole why that makes you cry, we could people talk about money and get caught up in ROI and get caught up in what they have and can it cover for long-term care and all this stuff. But I totally agree with you as part of the, and I hate to use the word holistic, but part of the whole planning for people's retirement should involve the passion. What's the passion? What are you doing? Just because you're retired, passion is not flipping channels unless you're, professional channel flipper and work for Nielsen, right? I mean, if that's your passion. But when you're advising clients and working with the advisors that work at the firm you're with, are you always making sure that they're asking that why and making sure that there's a reason for what's being done other than just numbers and return?
Yeah. So our, process that we call it the proven process internally, which is, always working with people on the emotional and soft aspect of this first, that you do really have to dive in to understand what's people's relationship with their money, what are their goals, how do they feel about things versus just hopping in and saying, hey, here's the numbers. And our CEO talks about it a lot. He's like, if you live and die off the returns, right, you can't control that. End of day, right, returns are going to be, for the most part, what returns are. And we're not out there trying to outperform the market on returns. Now, there's a whole world out there that's trying to do that, and it's not us. And if you're looking for that, you got to go elsewhere and look for it, right? If you think that there's magic out there that, that's what you're looking for. And some people do, right? I mean, there's a portion of the world that's looking for that, and there'll be a market then that serves you, but it's not kind of where planning lies. The planning doesn't lie in the notion of we're going to, somehow find magic and, provide better returns or whatever it might be. So it's getting back to the individual, starting with the proven process, working on, planning and just seeing what does true wealth mean to you. And so that's a term we use a lot here too, is true wealth. And if you kind of think about like the hierarchy of needs, which a lot of people might remember from school, which is, you take care of your bases and you build off of it up until something that's a little bit more, spiritual or detached from the basics that you need. And honestly, that can be applied to finances too, that you have to take care of your basic income needs and spending needs and your food, your healthcare, your housing, your taxes, and you build upon that to get to the things that, might be legacy or meaning in your life. But you have to talk about those, because if you don't talk about them, like, what are we doing there? Like, why are we here to do planning? And, I think all those questions, about family is important, about loss, about legacy, about how you want to make others feel. Like, why are you here today at all? I mean, if it's, if somebody says I'm here today because I want better returns than my neighbor, I mean, that's a pretty short-sighted view of the world. So I think helping people on that is often good. And a lot of people haven't done that work either. They haven't put in that time. And, you can view this relationship as a coaching relationship in a lot of cases too. Financial coaching is a term that's out there now too. And some people need that, and they need to change their relationship with money, where they've come from an area of stress and, not an abundance mindset. And they need to change. They need to fundamentally go back to that relationship and change it. And that requires coaching. It's not just planning. It requires having conversations and thinking about, what was your first experience with money? Well, it was being on food stamps and not having enough money. Okay, well, you're going to approach things differently than somebody else who grew up wealthy and didn't have to struggle and has always had an abundance mindset and can spend because they've never, felt the pain of being without money. And so those require different approaches.
Looking at just retirement income planning, what are some of the misconceptions, biases that you run across that you're trying to clarify with your work?
Yeah, there's been a lot out there. I think one of them was that this retirement income, issue was somehow related to a lack of financial literacy. That's actually a bias that we can kind of prove isn't really the case. Now, there is like an income literacy gap out there. And I know we've been talking about terms people don't love. Literacy is a term that not everybody loves, but it's one that at least people understand what we're talking about when we use it. So for purposes of conversation, it functions well as a communication tool. But if you look at people nearing retirement, we actually see most Americans have gained some sense of financial literacy. It does not mean, though, that they're good at income planning. Those are two different things. They're very different. The testing for both, like we understand compound interest and the value of savings and long-term growth by the time we get to retirement. So that's a good thing. But the flip side is Americans don't exhibit much retirement income literacy. And again, it makes sense because they haven't experienced it. So I do think that that is a juxtaposition that not a lot of people get, that I might be financial literate, but it doesn't mean I'm retirement income literate. And those are two different things. The other one is, I think there's a big misconception about longevity and what does that even mean? And what we do see, there's a lot of data that will show people tend to underestimate their own life expectancy, right? We think we're going to die earlier than we're going to, but at the same time, we also act as if we're immortal and won't get sick and won't need long-term care. So we have this very weird piece, right? Like, well, I'm obviously not going to live to 90, but I'm not going to need long-term care either. And I'm like, well, how are we playing both of these wrong?
Right.
And so some things are just reframing how you ask questions there. And, you know, if you're alive at 65, you're a couple, right? It's more likely than not that one of the two of you will be alive at, 90, 95. You start looking at the numbers like that. And then you said, like, if there was a greater than 50% chance you'd be alive at this date, would you plan for it? And if the answer is yes, then we need to change our planning. And if you frame the question like that, people answer yes. If you say, do you expect to live to 90, many fewer people say yes. So some of that is just, that's framing. It's how information is presented to you, changes your outcome. And that is truly what is considered actually an irrational decision. Do you make a decision differently just based on the way that information is presented? So I think as an industry, we've presented information kind of improperly for a long time. Even something you'll appreciate this one, like deferring Social Security is, I believe that we've kind of messed that up because we've presented the information incorrectly. We always tell people, hey, if you defer, you get 8% more. Well, what are we telling people? We're saying take on additional risk to get a higher guarantee.
Exactly.
Well, we know that people actually don't chase, on average, people don't like to chase risk for higher return. We'll chase risk to get rid of loss. And we like to lock in gains, right? Like we want the certainty of gain, but we'll take risk to avoid loss. It's a little bit odd, but it is how people react. So telling people to defer, meaning I will skip my guarantees and I will take on the risk of dying next year to receive a gain, is the incorrect way to look at it. What we need to present it is, if you claim today, here's how much total income you would be giving up in your life. That is a better way to present it to most people. Not everybody, but to most people. But it's not how it's done, right? It's not how we present anything in that fashion. And so there are little things like that. Those are learning how people react to information and reframing those points. So, deferral, secure income. We talked about longevity and long-term care. All of those can be presented in better ways to actually get people to act upon them versus how we approach it today, which is more fear-driven, which is a motivating factor, but it's not as powerful as some of the other ones that we could use.
We had Wade Pfau on recently, and one of his books that I just found fascinating was the reverse mortgage book. And I know that you are one of the few handful of people that bravely address that and take, pioneers take all the arrows, right? Can you kind of explain how that works from the standpoint of just how you introduce that to people? Because I know annuities get a bad rap, and a lot of that's deserved on some of the sales practices that are going on out there. But in the reverse mortgage side, Wade has a good take on that. I'd like to hear your take on that as well.
Yeah, so, Dr. Wade Pfau and I are pretty good friends. He wrote the foreword to my book. I was part of the college and in the income center when we hired him to bring him in. And he actually, that's an area you said the future, right? He was the future of the program. When I stepped out, he was right there behind me and stepped in as the director. And so Wade and I, while we were at the college, we became involved with a group at the time, which was called the Funding Longevity Task Force. And it was a group of academics, or we joke eggheads, that just talked about reverse mortgages and started to be this early group of researchers. Dr. Barry Sachs, Dr. John Salter out of Texas Tech. And Barry Sachs is one of the more intelligent people I've ever met. I don't know how many of these people, I believe he has a PhD from MIT and a JD from Harvard. There's only, I don't know how many of those there are, but
it's a pretty good combo. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's at least good at research, right? At a minimum. And
exactly.
He's a very humble person. He's one of those people that also teaches you that the smartest person in the room never actually thinks they're the smartest person in the room, right? If you asked, are you above or below average intelligence? He might put his hand up, I'm average intelligence. And you're just looking at him going, Barry, there's nothing average about you, my friend. So this group came together and, it was kind of based off of this notion that popped up. Two researchers, Barry Sachs and his brother, and John Salter and Harold Levinsky. And for people who are listening, you don't have to worry about who these people are. They're just the names of the researchers. So we had two groups in the same year that ended up doing research about reverse mortgages and the use of them, because everything was, and even FINRA, one of the regulating bodies here in the financial industry, said use reverse mortgages as a last resort. That's been the status quo for a long time.
Right.
And so you got academics that just decided to go test this. And what they found was that was wrong. that like none of the math supported it. And, now it seems common sense that obviously the math shouldn't support it, but at the time, people just hadn't tested it. And interestingly enough, this is the best thing for academic research, is that both of the studies were occurring at the same time, unknown to each other, and had similar outcomes. Why is that really important in the research world? Because it means that we didn't have the bias of one existing and impacting the research of future researchers. So while they were published not at the exact same time, they actually finished their outcomes and were in journal publication at the same time, which is huge. And what that research found at the time was, instead of using home equity and reverse mortgages as a line of last resort, in most situations, you're going to be better off using it early in retirement. And there's a basic fundamental principle that underlies all this. And I always do this. Let's say we had three assets. One's going to grow at 3%, one's going to grow at 5%, and one's going to grow at 8%. And you get to retirement, Stan, and I say, here's your three assets. We got your 3% bucket, your 5%, and your 8%. You choose which one to spend first, and how do you want to end up with the most money? Which bucket do you spend first? You spend down your highest earning asset first? No, of course not. You leave that for as long as possible. Do you spend your second highest earning asset next? No, you probably don't. You probably spend what? You spend your lowest earning asset first, right? Makes perfect, all else being equal, makes perfect sense. Well, essentially houses, if you look, the Shiller Index grew at about 3% historical, right? Throughout the course of the United States. Bonds were closer to 4 to 5%. Equities are closer to 8, depending on which equities you're looking at. Okay, so if we get to retirement, should we keep our home to our final asset? That really all homes do historically is keep pace with inflation. Well, actually, we shouldn't, because on average, that is going to keep our worst performing return asset the longest and spend down our other assets first. And so what the research essentially found was use reverse mortgages in downturns, right, earlier in retirement, or to help defer the spending of other assets, right? So if the market drops, instead of spending a bunch of your, equities and bonds, pool from your home. Pull from your equity through a reverse mortgage versus spending down your stocks and bonds early during volatile time periods and leaving your home to the end. And that's what they've kind of deemed as the coordinated strategy, coordinating your home equity distributions and spending along with your other assets. And you used the term earlier. It's a holistic approach. And honestly, there are very few things in the world that I've ever seen where just leaving something alone and doing nothing with it is the best strategy, right? Typically, doing something is better than doing nothing. So it actually makes perfect sense that some coordination between the assets is probably better than doing absolutely nothing with it. And that is what the research has found. Now, telling the story of that group, it's obviously progressed a lot. The laws and the rules have changed. The research has gotten deeper and deeper. That group moved from there to part of the American College when Wade and I were there. And then when I left, I kind of, shepherded it away in a sense, because I wasn't going to be there anymore. Wade's still part of it. And we took it to University of Illinois, and it is part of the University of Illinois. And we still do research out of there. It's grown a little bit, where we've got some former HUD members and additional researchers that have joined since then. And it has broadened. We do look at home equity. It is really the initiative now is around home equity and income planning. But it's a big miss for a lot of people, is just having a bias against the product. Now, I agree the same way, and I've said this many times, both about annuities and reverse mortgages, is I believe both products have been oversold and underutilized.
Agreed.
Which means I don't love the sales practices, and there were a lot of, in the reverse space especially, one of the issues was people were compensated based off of the dollar amount that you pulled out of the loan. That actually doesn't tie to any best practice of the research. I mean, and the clear bias there is, if I'm a loan officer there and that's how I'm compensated, I'm trying to get you to pull all the money out day one, even if you need it or don't need it. That's obviously not a good practice, and I don't support it. But, integration of home equity and retirement planning is important.
The American dream can turn into the American stream, right? I'm always thinking about marketing. How do you frame it in English so that people understand it? But I haven't even gotten to the list of topics. So that means you have to come back on in the future, Jaime, the truth. But any last, we got to kind of close it up because, people have to get off the treadmill or get out of their car. So any sage advice for the listeners and viewers from Jaime the Truth Hopkins?
Well, I thought it was the future. Now I'm, Paul Pierce, the truth. The truth was already taken.
It is. You are the future. No, and all kidding, you are the future. And I say that with respect, but also the fact that I think you're kind of like me. You're very serious about what you do, but you don't take yourself too seriously.
Yeah. Well, I would say here's something I give to everyone. I write this in the book too, Rewirement, which is challenge what you think is true. Okay. There are lots of examples of things we know to be true that we're wrong about. And I use this example as more of a, normal one because everyone knows the answer. What's the one thing, Stan, you know about Napoleon?
I'm taller than he is.
Right. Everybody knows that Napoleon, right, or most people, was a shorter, a short person, right? There's the Napoleon complex named after it.
Vertically challenged is what I call it.
Right. Right. And then here's the thing. We know as a fact that Napoleon was an above average height individual. He was an above average height person. And all of a sudden you're like, no, that can't be true. I can go look it up. We've got all that, they have everything about it. The only reason we believe that Napoleon was short was because of British propaganda during the war. They drew him as a tiny, short, fat guy on the horse to discredit him.
Very nice. I said it with confidence because I'm 6'6", so I'm pretty sure.
Oh yeah,
that I could post him up and score at will him on Napoleon.
You easily could have posted him up. And remember, everybody was sure. And then some people bring it up. Well, he was only 5'6" or whatever. I'm like, but that's irrelevant because at the time he was still a taller person, right? He would be a 6'1" person today. So no, Napoleon wasn't short. But everybody believes that to be true. I mean, you probably could even get a Jeopardy question, what is, and get that one wrong. And those things are amazing to me. And the fact that we just believe that they're true, we don't challenge things. That is true all across the board. You believe that reverse mortgages are bad and evil. Products in themselves are very rarely good.
Or you see the ad that says, I hate all annuities.
Yep, I hate annuities. Well, we don't have enough time to dive into that one, but obviously
next time. Yeah. I mean, I always tell people you already own one. It's called Social Security, so you can't hate it that much, or you need to call the government and cancel the payments. Jaime, the future, I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure having you on. I'm going to hold you to the fact that you nodded your head that you will come back on because I want to get into a lot more details, but I really enjoyed learning about who you are, what makes you tick, the background. I've certainly been a follower of your work, as I'm sure a lot of my clients and people listen to this, but I really appreciate you joining us. And with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us on Fun with Annuities, where our saying here is live in the reality, not the dream. I will see you next week.